fragile bid for peace in the Gulf is buckling under mounting global pressure, with the United States and Iran once again teetering toward renewed confrontation, even as multiple powers scramble to keep the diplomatic track alive. In the days since Washington escalated warnings over the Strait of Hormuz and signaled it is prepared to squeeze Iran harder, Moscow, Beijing, Islamabad, and other capitals have moved with urgency, trying to drag both sides back from what they describe as the edge of a regional spiral that could quickly become uncontrollable. The stakes are blunt and immediate. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow maritime choke point linking the Gulf to global markets, a vital corridor for commercial shipping, and a major artery for energy exports. Any sustained disruption reverberates far beyond the Middle East, threatening fuel supplies, shipping insurance, and already fragile international trade routes. That is why, as tensions build, outside powers are not only warning against escalation, but actively inserting themselves as would-be referees, pushing for restraint, ceasefire commitments, and a renewed negotiating format before another clash ignites. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has been among the most direct voices, urging de-escalation, pressing Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in a tense exchange aimed at preventing a return to open fighting. Russia's message has been consistent. The crisis has no military solution, and the window to act is narrowing. A senior Chinese position, delivered publicly alongside diplomatic contacts with Gulf partners, has carried a similar warning, underscoring that an attempt to block Hormuz would cut against the interests of the wider international community and could invite consequences far beyond the immediate battlefield. In one of the clearest statements of principle circulating among mediators, the message has been framed around the shared global interests in keeping the waterway open. Asterisk. He said the Strait of Hormuz is a crucial international trade route for both goods and energy, and ensuring the region's security, stability, and unimpeded flow serves the common interests of the entire international community. Astics, the same line of argument emphasizes that the shipping crisis cannot be separated from the broader conflict involving Iran, and that fixing the shipping problem requires ending the fighting, not simply deploying more ships. He said the fundamental reason for the obstruction of navigation through the strait lies in the ongoing conflict involving Iran. And the conclusion is delivered as a prescription rather than a plea. He said the only way to resolve this issue is to achieve an immediate ceasefire and bring an end to the fighting as quickly as possible. From Beijing's perspective, the emphasis has been on restraint and the need to keep ceasefire arrangements from collapsing under pressure or mistrust. Asking Tia. He said all parties involved should maintain the air composure and exercise maximum restraint. Asterisk, and the statement of intent is explicit. He said China is willing to continue to play an active and constructive role in this matter. In that framing, the launch of direct U.S.-Iran negotiations in Pakistan has been cited as a meaningful opening, however limited, towards stabilizing the region. He said the fact that the United States and Iran have initiated negotiations in Pakistan represents a significant step towards easing the overall situation. But the warning is that a pause is not peace. A temporary arrangement can fail if the underlying disputes remain unresolved or if either side believes the other is maneuvering. That is why China's message has also included a call to honor ceasefire terms and stay within diplomatic channels rather than slipping back into escalation by accident or design. Asterisk, he said the Chinese side expresses its hope that all relevant parties will conscientiously uphold the temporary ceasefire arrangement and steadfastly commit to resolving their disagreements through political and diplomatic avenues, thereby preventing any re-escalation of the conflict and the reignition of warfare in order to create the necessary conditions for the early and complete restoration of peace and tranquility throughout the Gulf region. Adams, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi, has reinforced that position in conversations with senior Gulf interlocutors, stressing that any attempt to shut Hormuz would collide with global interests and deepen instability. In parallel, Beijing has signaled it recognizes the security concerns of regional states, offering rhetorical backing for Gulf sovereignty and stability while insisting that only diplomacy can produce a lasting ceasefire. Meanwhile, Pakistan has positioned itself as a key mediator, working to revive the negotiating track after talks in Islamabad failed to produce a breakthrough. Pakistani officials have publicly suggested that the diplomatic effort T is still alive and that additional sessions could be convened quickly even if the process remains fragile. Alternative venues have also been discussed in diplomatic circles, including Geneva, as mediators search for a format and location that can keep the parties talking long enough to bank incremental progress. From Washington, the tone has been a mix of guarded optimism and sharp pressure. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has argued that recent negotiations produced movement, but he has portrayed Iran as the party that must now decide whether to accept U.S. demands, especially on nuclear enrichment and regional commitments tied to sanctions relief and broader normalization. In one key assessment of the diplomacy so far, Vance has put the question of flexibility squarely on Tehran. Actus, he said, we did make some progress in the negotiation. The big question from here on out is whether the Iranians will have enough flexibility, whether the Iranians will accept the critical things that we need to see in order for things to get done. Actus, U.S. officials have linked the negotiations to the Strait of Hormuz as well, expecting concrete movement toward reopening the waterway as part of any wider ceasefire package. The logic from Washington is that freedom of navigation is not optional, and that any arrangement that leaves Hormuz disrupted is by definition incomplete. The American pressure campaign has also been described in unusually blunt terms, with Vance arguing that Washington has combined military and economic tools to force compliance. According to the U.S. line, the offer on the table involves sanctions relief in exchange for nuclear restrictions and steps to reduce Iran's ability to quickly produce weapons-grade material. Iranian negotiators, by contrast, have pushed for guarantees against future reversals, compensation mechanisms, and more limited or phased constraints, seeking to preserve some enrichment capacity under what they argue would be monitored terms. The heart of the dispute is the scope of Iran's enrichment program and what normalization would actually require. Vance has suggested the U.S. wants more than a temporary pause and has signaled that the broader U.S. vision is an Iran integrated into the global economy, but only if it ceases activities Washington characterizes as nuclear weapons pursuit and regional destabilization. He has also described why the U.S. delegation stepped away from Pakistan without an agreement, claiming the Iranian team lacked authority to finalize terms. Asked it, he said, "This is ultimately why we left Pakistan, because what we figured out is that they were unable. I think the team that was there, one was unable to cut a deal, and they had to go back to Tehran, either from the supreme leader or somebody else, and actually get approval to the terms that we had set." Adams, then, outlining the broader American demand for a reconfigured Iranian state relationship with the world, Vance framed the U.S. position as con. Conditional acceptance. Iran can be treated like a normal country, but only if it acts like one according to U.S. definitions. Adams, he said, the President of the United States has said he would be very happy if Iran was treated like a normal country, if it had a normal economy, if its people were able to prosper and thrive. And he tied that directly to nuclear and regional conditions, asking, but in order for Iran to be a normal country economically, it's going to have to be a normal country from the perspective of not pursuing a nuclear weapon, and it's going to have to be a normal country from not pursuing terrorism. Despite that hard edge, mediators in Ankara and Islamabad and others speaking privately have continued to argue that compromise is still possible, especially if the parties can lower the temperature long enough to trade phased steps, shipping access in exchange for limited concessions, enrichment constraints in exchange for sanctions relief, and verification mech. Hanisms that both sides can sell at home without appearing to capitulate, but the mistrust is deep, and not merely because of the technical nuclear disputes. Iranian officials have accused the United States of shifting demands midstream, introducing new conditions that were not part of earlier understandings. U.S. officials, for their part, argue Iran has used negotiating processes to buy time, avoid decisive commitments, and test Western resolve. That distrust has been compounded by the role of third parties, especially Israel, whose security concerns sit at the center of the dispute, but whose involvement also fuels Iranian claims that Washington's negotiating position is not fully independent. Those tensions became more explicit after Iran claimed that contact between Israel's leadership and senior U.S. officials disrupted the Islamabad talks, with Tehran suggesting that outside influence helped hijack momentum, just as negotiators were trying to narrow gaps. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has revealed details of direct contact with Vice President Vance around the time of the breakdown, highlighting how closely Israel was plugged into the diplomatic process, even as the United States negotiated with Iran. In remarks delivered publicly, Netanyahu described a call from Vance while the U.S. Vice President was traveling back from Islamabad, saying he received a detailed account of the negotiations and their collapse. Asked, he said, "I had a conversation yesterday with Vice President J.D. Vance. He called me from his plane on his way back from Islamabad. He reported to me in great detail, as members of this administration do on a daily basis, regarding the progress of the negotiations." Then he underscored the key point. He said, in this particular case, the breakdown in negotiations, Netanyahu went further, characterizing the rupture as driven by Washington's refusal to tolerate what he framed as an Iranian violation of the understanding that had allowed negotiations to begin. He said the outburst came from the American side, which was unwilling to tolerate Iran's blatant violation of the agreement to enter negotiations. In Netanyahu's account, the core bargain was supposed to be straightforward: a ceasefire would hold, and Iran would immediately allow the straits to reopen. He said essentially the understanding was that we would cease fire and Iran would immediately open the straits. Then he added the key allegation. He said they did not do that, and he concluded, he said the Americans were not prepared to accept this. Netanyahu also claimed the central U.S. demand is far-reaching, focused on removing enriched material and preventing future enrichment inside Iran for an extended period. As he said, he also made it clear to me that the central issue on the agenda for President Trump and the United States is the removal of all enriched material and to ensure there's no further enrichment or continuation in the coming years. ASTIC. Then he spelled out the time horizon as he understood it. He said, and this could be for decades, no enrichment within Iran. ASTIC. Netanyahu described that as aligned with Israeli priorities. He said this is their main focus. This is, of course, something that is very important to us. And he framed Washington's follow-on response as punitive maritime pressure. He said, and because Iran violated the rules, President Trump decided to place them under a blockade. Then he described it in even starker language. He said that's a foreign word for a siege, a naval siege. Netanyahu made clear that Israel supports that approach and claims ongoing coordination. He said, we, of course, fully support this aggressive stance, and we are coordinated with the United States at all times. The remarks have drawn scrutiny because they suggest near real-time coordination between the U.S. administration and Israel regular. Briefings, direct updates, and a shared line on what went wrong and what must happen next. To critics, that reinforces the argument that Israel maintained significant influence over a negotiating process in which the United States was supposed to be testing a direct channel with Iran. To supporters of the coordination, it underscores the reality that Israel sees the Iranian nuclear file as existential and that Washington will not make moves that sever Israeli security concerns from the deal's structure. Iran has rejected the premise of Netanyahu's narrative, suggesting external pressure, especially Israeli concerns, pushed Washington toward demands Tehran considers unacceptable or beyond earlier frameworks. From Tehran's perspective, the addition of sweeping enrichment prohibitions, long-term restrictions, and what it sees as coercive maritime measures makes the talks look less like diplomacy and more like surrender terms. All of this is unfolding at a moment when the wider international community is visibly anxious, not simply about geopolitics, but about practical economic disruption. Insurers watch the shipping lanes, commodity traders react to every threat, every ship movement, every naval posture. Governments calculate the domestic political cost of fuel spikes and supply chain shocks. And Gulf states, caught between rival powers and exposed to the consequences of escalation, press for stability while guarding their sovereignty and security. For now, the diplomatic machinery is still turning, even if the gears are grinding. Mediators believe another round of talks can be arranged, and there are signals that back-channel conversations have not stopped. But the path forward depends on whether Washington and Tehran can agree on sequencing. What happens first, what verification is acceptable, what sanctions relief is real and durable, and what open Hormuz means in operational terms, immediately, permanently, and without conditions. The coming days will test whether international pressure can keep the pause from collapsing. Russia and China have warned that escalation could push the region beyond control. Pakistan is offering its capital as a venue again. The United States is saying progress is possible, but insisting Iran must bend. Iran is signaling it will not accept what it views as shifting goalposts or externally imposed diktats. And hanging over every move is the same reality. The Gulf is at a critical inflection point where global energy security, maritime trade, and geopolitical stability are all exposed to the consequences of a single miscalculation. One missed message, one misunderstood signal, one hardline decision taken at the wrong moment before diplomacy has a chance